The rain in Seattle washes away the grime on the sidewalks, but it cannot scrub the scent of hotel soap from a cheating wife's skin. Mark sat in the dark living room, the blue light of his tablet reflecting in his eyes, waiting for the sound of the front door unlocking. He knew exactly what he would see: the feigned exhaustion, the rehearsed smile, and the damp hair that would betray everything she was about to deny. If the unraveling of a perfect life fascinates you, the quiet moments before the heart breaks, stay with me. There is a tragedy in the truth that we must face together. The condensation on the window pane had turned the city lights of Seattle into smeared, weeping streaks of gold and gray. Inside the penthouse, the silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic, ticking sound of the wall clock, a sound Mark had never noticed until tonight. It sounded less like time passing and more like a countdown. Mark sat in the leather armchair facing the door, a glass of untouched scotch resting on the side table. On his lap, his tablet sat dark and dormant, a black mirror reflecting his own tired face. It was 10:14 p.m. He heard the elevator ding down the hall. Then the distinct click of heels on the parquet floor of the corridor, slowing down as they approached Unit 4B. The key turned in the lock with a heavy thunk, and the door swung open. Elena stepped inside. She brought the cold air of the autumn night with her, but as she closed the door and leaned back against it, exhaling a long, shaky breath, Mark smelled something else. It wasn't the metallic tang of the city rain. It was lavender and eucalyptus, the specific, unmistakable scent of the toiletries stocked at the Fairmont Hotel downtown. "God, what a night," Elena said, her voice pitched slightly higher than usual. She began unbuttoning her trench coat, her movements jerky and rushed. She didn't look at him directly. Traffic on I-5 was a nightmare, and I left my umbrella at the office, so I had to make a run for it. She finally looked up, her eyes scanning the dim room until they landed on him. She offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a brittle, practiced thing. "Why are you sitting in the dark, Mark?" "Just thinking," Mark said. His voice was steady, terrifyingly calm even to his own ears. Elena pulled her coat off and hung it on the rack. That was when he saw it clearly. Her hair. It was wet, not frizzy from humidity or damp on the surface from a dash through a drizzle. It was soaked through at the roots, slicked back, the way it looked 20 minutes after a shower. "You got caught in the rain?" Mark asked. "Yes, soaked to the bone," she lied, smoothing her hands over her pristine, dry silk blouse. "I just want to take a hot bath and forget this day existed." She started to walk past him toward the bedroom, the click-clack of her heels echoing like gunshots in the quiet apartment. "Elena," Mark said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. She stopped, her hand hovering over the hallway doorframe. She turned slowly, a flicker of irritation, or was it fear, crossing her face. "What?" "I'm tired, Mark." "Your blouse is dry," he noted. Elena froze. Her hand went instinctively to her collar. I dried off in the car. With the heater." "And the hair?" "I told you I ran through the rain." "It smells like the Fairmont," Mark said. "Lavender and eucalyptus. We haven't used that brand in years." The color drained from Elena's face, leaving her pale beneath the expertly applied blush. She opened her mouth, likely to manufacture another layer of falsehoods, to stack another lie on top of the crumbling foundation of their 10-year marriage. "Mark, you're being paranoid. I had a meeting near there. Maybe I picked up the scent from the lobby." Mark lifted the tablet. The screen woke up, casting a harsh, pale glow over his features. He didn't look at her. He looked at the device. "I didn't want to believe it," he said softly. "When you took my car this morning because yours was in the shop, I didn't think twice. But the dash cam, Elena, it records the interior when the car is parked if the motion sensor is triggered." Elena took a step back, her back hitting the wall. "Mark, you weren't at a meeting," he said. He turned the tablet around to face her. On the screen, the timestamp read 5:30 p.m. The interior of the Audi was gray. Elena was in the passenger seat. Leaning over the center console was a man, Julian, their financial advisor. His hand was tangled in her hair. They were kissing. Not a quick peck, but a deep, desperate hunger that Mark hadn't felt from her in a decade. Then the audio cut through the room. "I can't go home to him yet," Elena's voice on the recording whispered, breathless. "I need an hour. Just an hour with you." Mark paused the video. The frame froze on Elena's eyes, closed in ecstasy, a stranger's face wearing his wife's skin. "Mark, please," she whispered, the defiance gone, replaced by a hollow, trembling panic. "I can explain." "You already did," Mark said, placing the tablet on the table with a finality that sounded like a gavel strike. "You said you were wet from the rain." He stood up, looking at the woman he had vowed to protect, realizing there was nothing left to save. "Our marriage ended 3 hours ago, Elena. I just needed you to come home so I could tell you." The video on the tablet screen had gone dark, the screen timing out into a black void, but the image of Julian's hand in Elena's hair was burned into the retina of Mark's mind. For a long minute, the only sound in the penthouse was the relentless drumming of the Seattle rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. It felt as though the apartment had been depressurized, the air sucked out, leaving them both gasping in a vacuum. Elena took a step toward him, her hand reaching out, but stopping short of touching his arm. It was a gesture of muscle memory, a reflex from a life that no longer existed. "Mark, it was just... It happened so fast," she stammered, her voice fracturing. "We were just talking about the portfolio, and then it doesn't mean anything, I swear." Mark looked at her hand. The diamond on her ring finger caught the dim light of the hallway lamp. It looked sharp, cold, and entirely foreign. "Don't," Mark said. His voice was devoid of rage. It was dry, like dead leaves. "Do not reduce 10 years to a cliché. It meant nothing is an insult to my intelligence and to whatever time we wasted building this life." "I can fix this," she pleaded, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through her foundation. "I'll cut him off. I'll change firms. We can go to counseling." Mark walked past her, moving toward the kitchen to pour the scotch down the sink. He couldn't stomach the drink anymore. "You can't fix a shattered glass, Elena. You can only sweep up the pieces so you don't step on them." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You need to leave. Tonight." Elena's face crumbled. "Mark, it's pouring rain. This is my home, too." "Not anymore," he said quietly. "I'll sleep in the guest room if I have to, but I can't be in the same space as you right now. One of us goes, and since I'm not the one who smelled like lavender and betrayal, it's not going to be me." The cruelty of his logic silenced her. She stood there for a moment, waiting for him to crack, to scream, to throw the glass against the wall. Anything that would signal passion, even negative passion. But Mark just stood there, leaning against the marble counter, watching her like she was a stranger who had wandered into the wrong house. Defeated, Elena turned and walked to the master bedroom. Mark remained in the living room. He listened. He heard the closet door slide open on its tracks. Then came the sound that would haunt him for months. The rough, tearing noise of a suitcase zipper. It was a violent sound in the quiet apartment. He heard drawers opening, the rustle of fabric, the clinking of hangers. She wasn't packing her whole life, just enough to survive the night, just enough to run away. 10 minutes later, she emerged. She had changed out of the silk blouse into a gray hoodie, something soft and comforting, armor for a wounded animal. She pulled a small carry-on bag behind her. The wheels rumbled low against the hardwood floor. She paused at the door, her hand on the brass handle. She didn't look back this time. There was no cinematic pause, no final whisper of apology. She knew there was nothing left to say that the dashcam hadn't already said for her. The door opened. The sound of rain rushed in, louder now, filling the foyer with the noise of the city. Then the door clicked shut. Mark stood alone in the center of the living room. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. It pressed against his eardrums. He walked over to the door and engaged the deadbolt. Click. He went to the bedroom. The closet door was still half open. A few hangers swayed empty on the rail, ghost limbs where her clothes used to be. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, a cruel reminder. Mark sat on the edge of the bed, his side. He looked at the empty space on the left. It was perfectly made, the duvet smooth, the pillow fluffed. He reached out and placed his hand on the cool sheet. It felt like ice. He lay back, staring at the ceiling, fully dressed, listening to the rain, waiting for the grief to hit. But it didn't come. Only a numbness, vast and cold, settled over him as the first night of his new life began. 3 days later, the Museum of History and Industry was a kaleidoscope of crystal flutes, designer silk, and artificial laughter. It was the annual Emerald City Gala, a mandatory orbit for anyone who mattered in Seattle's architectural and development circles. Mark stood near the entrance, adjusting his cufflinks. He felt like an actor waiting in the wings of a stage he no longer wanted to perform on. He hadn't seen Elena since the door clicked shut on Tuesday night. They had communicated only through curt text messages regarding logistics. Meet at 7 o'clock. Don't be late. Wear the black dress. At 7:05 p.m., a black town car pulled up to the curb. Elena stepped out. She looked devastatingly perfect. She wore a floor-length velvet gown that clung to her frame, the dark fabric absorbing the camera flashes like a void. Her hair, dry, styled, and smelling of expensive salon products, cascaded over one shoulder. To the casual observer, she was the supportive wife of a rising architect. To Mark, she looked like a stranger wearing a costume. She walked toward him, her smile fixed in place. It was a professional smile, the kind she taught her PR clients to wear during crisis management press conferences. "You look tired," she said quietly as she reached him, her voice barely audible over the jazz quartet playing inside. "And you look like nothing happened," Mark replied, offering his arm. He felt the muscles in his jaw tighten. "Shall we?" Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second before slipping her hand into the crook of his elbow. Her touch burned through his tuxedo jacket. It wasn't heat. It was a phantom pain, a reminder of the intimacy that had been butchered in his living room just 72 hours ago. They moved through the crowd like a single organism. This was their routine. They were the power couple. Mark, the visionary builder. Elena, the charming voice who sold the vision. "Mark! Elena!" A booming voice cut through the chatter. It was Greg, the managing partner of Mark's firm. He was red-faced and jovial, holding a martini. "I was just telling the board about the waterfront project. You two are glowing tonight." "Thanks, Greg," Elena said smoothly, her laugh sounding light and genuine. "We're just happy the rain let up for the evening." Mark felt her fingers tighten on his arm. It was a signal, a plea for him to play along. He forced the corners of his mouth upward. It felt like stretching old rubber. "Elena is the reason I get any work done," Mark said. The lie tasted like ash on his tongue. "She keeps the chaos organized." "That's what wives are for, right?" Greg joked, clapping Mark on the back. The evening became a blur of hollow pleasantries. Mark watched Elena work the room. She was brilliant at it. She charmed the investors, laughed at the bad jokes, and pivoted conversations away from anything personal. It was terrifying how easily she lied. It made Mark wonder how much of their 10 years together had been a performance just like this one. Around 9 p.m., a photographer from Seattle Met approached them. "One photo for the society page?" the photographer asked, lifting his camera. "Of course," Elena said. She leaned into Mark. He felt her body press against his side, soft, warm, familiar. Instinctively, he placed his hand on her waist. Under the velvet, he felt her rib cage expand as she took a breath. For a millisecond, the muscle memory took over, and he almost leaned soon to smell her hair. Then he remembered the dashcam footage. He remembered Julian's hands on this same waist. Mark's hand went rigid. He didn't pull away, but his touch turned mechanical, like a claw. He stared into the lens, his eyes cold and flat. Flash. The blinding light captured the lie forever. "Got it. Beautiful," the photographer said, moving on to the next target. As soon as the camera turned away, they sprang apart. The space between them filled instantly with a glacial chill. "I can't do this anymore," Elena whispered, her composure cracking. Her eyes darted around the room, checking for eavesdroppers. "Mark, please, look at me. I'm drowning here." Mark took a sip of his sparkling water, looking over her shoulder at the city skyline visible through the glass atrium. "You're not drowning, Elena," he said, his voice low and devoid of sympathy. "You're just swimming in the deep end. You wanted excitement, remember? You wanted a life outside of us. Well, you have it. Enjoy the party." He turned and walked away toward the bar, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the crowd, looking beautiful and utterly abandoned. Room 412 at the Thompson Hotel smelled of industrial lemon cleaner and starch. It was a scent devoid of history, the olfactory equivalent of a blank page. Elena sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, the duvet undisturbed around her. Her phone buzzed against the nightstand, vibrating against the glass surface like a trapped insect. It was Julian. "Are you okay? I saw the photos from the gala. You looked tense." Elena stared at the message. 3 months ago, a text like that would have sent a flush of dopamine through her system. It would have been proof that someone was watching her, really seeing her, in a way Mark hadn't for years. Mark saw schedules, he saw blueprints, he saw the logistical framework of their life. Julian saw her, or at least, he saw the version of her that wanted to be admired. She didn't reply. Instead, she scrolled up. The history of their affair was archived in blue and gray bubbles. It hadn't started with a hotel key. It started with a complaint about a difficult client over a lunch that lasted 20 minutes too long. Then came the innocent flattery about her presentation skills. Then the drinks after work. Elena remembered the specific moment the line was crossed. It wasn't physical. It was a Tuesday in August. She had come home excited about landing the Amazon account, bursting to tell Mark. He had been on a conference call in his study, hand raised in a shush motion before she even opened her mouth. She had retreated to the kitchen, the excitement dying in her throat. 10 minutes later, she had texted Julian. "I got the account." He had called immediately. "You're a star, Elena. I knew you would crush it." That was the drug, the validation, the feeling of being the protagonist in someone else's movie rather than a supporting character in Mark's architectural empire. She looked around the hotel room. The beige curtains were drawn, blocking out the view of the sound. The thrill of the affair had been inextricably linked to the secrecy, the stolen moments in her car, the brush of hands under a table, the adrenaline of almost getting caught. Now that she was caught, the adrenaline was gone, replaced by a nauseating clarity. Julian wasn't a savior. He was just a man who liked the ego boost of sleeping with a successful, married woman. And she wasn't a victim of neglect. She was a coward who had chosen the easy high over the hard conversation. The phone buzzed again. "Julian, can I come over?" Elena looked at her reflection in the dark television screen opposite the bed. She looked smaller than she remembered. The wet hair excuse from Tuesday night played over in her mind. She remembered the rush of the shower in the gym locker room, scrubbing Julian's scent off her skin, convincing herself that she could wash away the guilt before she unlocked her front door. She had truly believed she could keep both lives separate forever. She typed a reply. Her thumbs hovered over the glass screen. "No. It's over." She deleted it. It felt too dramatic. "I'm tired. Not tonight." She deleted that too. It was a lie. She wasn't tired. She was shattered. Finally, she simply turned the phone off. The screen went black, swallowing the blue light. The room plunged into semi-darkness. She thought of Mark standing at the bar at the gala, his back turned to her. The rigidity of his posture. The absolute terrifying coldness in his eyes. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't fought for her. He had simply assessed the structural damage, deemed the building condemned, and walked away. Elena pulled her knees to her chest, the hotel sheets cool against her skin. For the first time, she realized that the wet hair hadn't just revealed an affair. It had revealed that she was willing to treat their marriage like something dirty that needed to be washed off. And Mark, with his architect's eye for detail, had seen right through the water to the rot underneath. She buried her face in her hands, and in the sterile silence of room 412, she finally began to weep. Not for Julian, but for the life she had set on fire just to feel some warmth. The death of a marriage in the 21st century is not announced with a black border on stationery. It is announced by the sudden, deafening silence of a group chat. For 5 years, the Whistler ski trip message thread had been the digital heartbeat of Mark and Elena's social circle. It was a stream of dinner plans, inside jokes, and real estate listings. But at 10 o'clock a.m. on Friday, Mark noticed the change. He had left the group quietly an hour earlier. By noon, 3 other husbands had messaged him privately. None of them asked how he was. They simply asked if he was free for a beer, the universal code for "we know and we are on your side." Elena, however, faced a different kind of silence. She sat in her office, her phone face down on the desk. She knew exactly what was happening. In the unspoken hierarchy of Seattle's upper middle class, the cheater forfeits the friends. It was a brutal, archaic rule, but it was absolute. Her phone buzzed. It wasn't a friend. It was her mother calling from Connecticut. Elena stared at the screen. She hadn't told her parents yet. She hadn't told anyone except Julian, and even he was growing distant, sensing the radioactive fallout of her life. She let the call go to voicemail. She couldn't bear to hear her mother's voice, which would inevitably shift from worry to that specific, disappointment-laced tone she reserved for Elena's failures. Across the city, Mark was dealing with the opposite problem. He sat in a booth at a diner near his firm, nursing a black coffee. Across from him sat his mother, Beatrice. She had driven down from Bellevue the moment the news hit the grapevine, which, in her case, was a text from a friend who played bridge with the mother of one of Elena's assistants. Beatrice didn't look sad. She looked vindicated. "I'm not going to say it," Beatrice said, slicing her melon with surgical precision. "Good," Mark said, rubbing his temples, "because I don't need to hear it." "But," she continued, ignoring him, "I always said she was too restless. A woman who spends that much time worrying about how she is perceived is usually hiding something." "Mom, stop. She's already been removed from the hospital charity board, you know," Beatrice added casually. "Sarah told me this morning. They can't have a scandal as a chairwoman. It reflects poorly on the donors." Mark felt a wave of nausea. He hated Elena for what she had done, for the lie about the wet hair, for the video that played on a loop in his nightmares. But hearing his mother dismantle Elena's reputation with such clinical glee felt dirty. It made the tragedy of their lost love feel cheap, like tabloid fodder. "I don't care about the board, Mom. I care about the fact that I have to sell the apartment." "Well, make sure you get the rug," Beatrice snapped. "That was a gift from your grandmother." Mark looked out the window. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets gray and stark. He realized then that the divorce wouldn't just be a legal separation of assets. It would be an amputation of history. Every friend they had made together, every dinner party they had hosted, every tradition they had built, it was all being divided up. And the division wasn't equal. Mark got the sympathy. Elena got the blame. Later that afternoon, Elena received an email. It was a notification from the Summer Gala Committee. "Dear Elena, given the current personal circumstances, we feel it might be best if you took a step back from the planning committee this year to focus on yourself. We wish you the best." It was polite. It was professional. And it was a clear eviction notice from the life she had spent a decade building. She wasn't just losing a husband. She was losing her citizenship in their shared world. She thought of Julian again, of the brief, stolen excitement. It seemed so small now, a flicker of a match that had burned down the entire house. She picked up her phone and finally listened to her mother's voicemail. "Elena, I heard from Aunt Martha. Please tell me it isn't true. Tell me you didn't do this. We raised you better." Elena deleted the message. She swiveled her chair to look at the city skyline, the glass towers reflecting a fractured version of herself. She was free of the marriage she had felt suffocated by, yes. But she was beginning to learn that freedom in a cage of isolation is just another form of prison. The conference room at Sterling and Finch smelled of mahogany polish and billable hours. It was a corner office on the 40th floor, offering a panoramic view of Elliott Bay, a view Mark usually admired, but today it looked like a gray, indifferent backdrop to an execution. Mark sat on one side of the massive oval table, his lawyer, a sharp-featured man named David beside him. Opposite them sat Elena and her attorney, a woman Mark knew by reputation as a scorched earth specialist. Elena was not wearing the soft gray hoodie from the night she left. She was wearing a structured navy blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun. She didn't look like the woman who had cried in the hotel room. She looked like a CEO arriving for a hostile takeover. She refused to make eye contact, her gaze fixed intently on the stack of documents in front of her. "Let's proceed to item 4, real estate," Elena's lawyer began, her voice crisp. "My client is requesting that the downtown penthouse be listed immediately, and the proceeds split 50-50. However, she is also asking for a 60-40 split on the liquid assets in the joint investment accounts, citing her contribution to the household management, which allowed Mr. Reynolds to focus on his firm." Mark felt a muscle twitch in his jaw. "Household management?" he said, breaking the cardinal rule of letting his lawyer speak. "We had a housekeeper, and while she was managing the household, she was entertaining guests in my car." "Mark," David warned, placing a hand on his arm, "let me handle this." Elena finally looked up. Her eyes were hard, void of the guilt he had seen just a week ago. This was the coldness the outline of their divorce had predicted. She was in survival mode now. The social circle had rejected her, so she was grabbing onto the only thing left: financial security. "It's the law, Mark," Elena said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly so. "Washington is a community property state. Infidelity doesn't negate equity." "It negates respect," Mark shot back. "We are not here to discuss feelings," her lawyer interjected smoothly. "We are here to discuss assets. Now, regarding the dog," Mark stiffened. "Barnaby stays with me." "Elena is very attached to Barnaby," the lawyer countered. "And since Mr. Reynolds travels frequently for site visits, we believe it is in the dog's best interest to reside with Elena. She has a more flexible schedule." Mark looked at Elena. Barnaby was a golden retriever they had adopted 3 years ago. Mark was the one who walked him every morning at 5 a.m. Mark was the one who took him to the vet. Elena liked Barnaby for Instagram photos. "You don't even like the dog hair on your clothes," Mark said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are doing this just to hurt me. You took the marriage. You took my trust. And now you want the dog? Is there anything you won't ruin?" Elena didn't flinch. She picked up a pen and tapped it rhythmically against the table. "I need a companion, Mark. I'm living in a sublet. You have the firm. You have the moral high ground. You have everyone's sympathy. Leave me the dog." It was a transaction. Everything was a transaction. The love letters they had written, the vows they had spoken, the mornings they had spent in bed. It had all been fed into a shredder and compressed into a spreadsheet of assets and liabilities. Mark looked at the woman across the table. He tried to find the girl he had met in college, the one who laughed at his bad sketches. She was gone. In her place was a stranger protecting her interests. "Fine," Mark said, leaning back, the fight draining out of him. "Split the accounts 60-40. Take the money. But if you try to take the dog, I will drag this out for 3 years. I will spend every dime I have on litigation just to make sure you get nothing. Is that what you want?" The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. Elena stared at him. She saw the resolve in his eyes. She saw that while he was broken, he was not weak. "Fine," she whispered, looking down. "You keep the dog." "Noted," David said, scribbling on the pad. Moving on to the wine collection. Mark turned his chair toward the window, watching a ferry cut through the dark water below. He realized then that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's negotiation. Seattle was a small city masquerading as a metropolis. Mark knew this intellectually, but he hadn't felt the claustrophobia of it until Tuesday evening. He was at Heirloom, a dimly lit restaurant near Pike Place, meeting a potential client for a landscape project in Bellevue. The client, a man named Henderson, was droning on about retaining walls and drainage grades. Mark nodded mechanically, slicing into his steak, his mind drifting. Then he looked up. Across the dining room, 3 tables away, sat a couple. The lighting was low, designed for intimacy, but Mark would know the slope of those shoulders anywhere. It was Elena, and sitting across from her, with his back partially turned to Mark, was Julian. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the jazz, the laughter, the clatter of forks, faded into a dull roar. Mark's initial instinct was a surge of adrenaline, a fight-or-flight spike that made his hands tremble beneath the table. He gripped his napkin. He wanted to stand up. He wanted to walk over there and flip the table, to scream, to shatter the polite atmosphere just as they had shattered his life. But he didn't move. He watched. He watched them not as a husband, but as an observer. And what he saw wasn't a passionate romance from a movie. He saw 2 people struggling to make conversation. Elena looked tired. She was wearing a dress he recognized, one she used to wear for their anniversary dinners. She was twirling the stem of her wine glass, a nervous habit she had when she was bored or anxious. She said something to Julian. Julian didn't laugh. He checked his watch. He glanced at his phone, the screen lighting up his face for a brief second. There was no electricity. There was no forbidden spark. Without the secrecy, without the thrill of the stolen hour, they were just 2 people eating overpriced halibut in a crowded room. "Mark, you with me?" Henderson asked, waving a hand slightly. "Sorry," Mark said, blinking. I thought I saw someone I used to know." He looked back at them. Elena looked up at that moment. Her eyes scanned the room and locked onto his. She froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. For 10 seconds they stared at each other across the gulf of tables and strangers. Mark expected to feel hate. He expected the burning acid of jealousy. But as he looked at her, pale, anxious, sitting with a man who was already checking his emails during a date, Mark felt something far worse. He felt pity. He realized that she had blown up her entire life. The stability, the history, the home, the respect of her peers, for this. For a dinner with a man who looked bored. She had traded a decade of loyalty for a few months of excitement, and now the excitement was gone, leaving her with just the wreckage. Elena's eyes widened, perhaps waiting for him to approach. She looked terrified, bracing for the confrontation. Mark simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible dip of his chin. It wasn't a greeting, it was a dismissal. He turned back to Henderson. "You were talking about the drainage on the north slope," Mark said, his voice steady, his hands no longer shaking. "I think we should use permeable pavers there. It handles the overflow better." He didn't look at them again for the rest of the meal. He ate his dinner. He drank his wine. And when he stood up to leave, he walked past their table without slowing down, without turning his head. He felt Elena's gaze burning into his back, desperate for acknowledgement, desperate for him to care enough to be angry. but he didn't care. As he stepped out into the cool night air, he realized the ghost that had been haunting his apartment was gone. The woman in the restaurant was just a stranger who had made a terrible mistake, and for the first time in weeks, Mark walked to his car without looking back. The penthouse was just a box of drywall and glass now, without the furniture, without the rugs, without the carefully curated art on the walls. The acoustics had changed. Mark's footsteps on the hardwood echoed with a hollow, lonely, sharp sound. It was move-out day. The sale had closed 48 hours ago. The new owners, a young tech couple from California, who reminded Mark painfully of who he and Elena used to be, were taking possession at noon. Mark stood in the center of the living room, looking out at the Space Needle. The rain had paused, leaving the sky a bruised, mottled purple. The front door opened. He didn't turn around. He knew the cadence of those steps. Elena walked in. She was carrying a small box of mail that had been forwarded to her temporary address by mistake. She placed it on the kitchen island, the only surface left in the room. "That's the last of it," she said. Her voice bounced off the bare walls. It sounded thinner than he remembered. Mark turned. She looked older. The stress of the last 2 months, the lawyers, the gossip, the reality of her new life, had etched fine lines around her eyes that no amount of foundation could hide. She wasn't the villain anymore. She was just a woman who had made a catastrophic error in judgment and was now living in the wreckage. "Thanks," Mark said. "It looks so small in here," Elena murmured, looking around. "I remember it feeling huge when we bought it." "Empty things always look smaller," Mark said. "There's nothing to distract the eye." Elena wrapped her coat tighter around herself. She looked down at her hand. She was holding her set of keys. The brass caught the gray light from the window. "Mark," she started, then stopped. She bit her lip. "I know it doesn't matter now, but I miss you. Not the apartment, not the money. I miss us. Before everything." Mark looked at her. He felt a ghost of the old affection, faint and distant, like a radio signal from a dying star. He didn't hate her. He didn't even pity her anymore. He just felt a profound sense of distance. "That version of us didn't exist, Elena," he said gently. "We were just two people pretending the silence wasn't loud. You tried to fill it with Julian. I tried to fill it with work. We both failed." He held out his hand. Elena hesitated. She looked at the keys, then at him. She wanted him to say something else, to yell, to cry, to give her something to hold on to. But he gave her nothing but patience. She dropped the keys into his palm. They clinked against his own set. It was a cold, metallic sound, the sound of a contract expiring. "Goodbye, Mark." "Goodbye, Elena." She turned and walked to the door. She paused for a second at the threshold, perhaps waiting for a movie moment, for him to call her back. But Mark remained still. She stepped out, and the door clicked shut. Mark stood alone in the silence. He looked down at the keys in his hand. He walked over to the kitchen counter and left them there, side by side, for the real estate agent. He picked up his briefcase. He checked his phone. He had a site visit in Fremont in 30 minutes. Life was continuing. The schedule remained. Mark walked to the door. He didn't look back at the view. He didn't look back at the empty bedroom where he had slept alone for so many years, even when she was there. He opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The air in the corridor was cool. He walked to the elevator and pressed the down button. When the doors slid open, he stepped inside and watched the numbers count down. 4, 3, 2, 1. The doors opened to the lobby. Outside, the Seattle rain had started again, washing the streets clean. Mark buttoned his coat, pushed open the heavy glass doors, and walked out into the storm. The water hit his face, cold and real. It didn't smell like lavender. It didn't smell like lies. It just smelled like rain.